The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, as Sergeant Jack Callahan knelt before the small, weathered headstone. His fingers traced the name engraved in stone, Echo. The ground beneath him was still, but Jack's heart pounded with memories that refused to fade. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I kept my promise. I never forgot you." Echo had been more than a military working dog. He'd been Jack's lifeline during his deployments, a partner in the most unforgiving terrain, the only constant in a world of uncertainty. But now, standing alone in the small cemetery behind his childhood home, Jack couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that he'd failed him. After returning from deployment, Jack found himself lost in a life that no longer felt familiar. The sounds of traffic set his nerves on edge. Crowded spaces made his skin crawl, and the weight of losing Echo pressed down on him like an anchor. His sister Emily had tried to help. She'd gently suggested therapy, support groups, anything to bring him back from the edge. But Jack wasn't interested in talking about the past. It was easier to drown it in silence and whiskey. Until the call came. The local animal shelter had a retired military K9 in need of a home. Jack hesitated, staring at the message for hours before finally calling back. He wasn't sure if he could go through it again, forming a bond, only to lose it. But a part of him, the part that still heard Echo's paws on the ground beside him at night, told him to give it a chance. The shelter smelled of disinfectant and wet fur. Dogs barked and whined from their cages, but one remained silent. Ranger, a Belgian Malinois like Echo, with deep brown eyes and a cautious stance, watching Jack from the corner of his kennel. The shelter volunteer, a kind-eyed woman named Lisa, led Jack over and spoke softly. "He's been through a lot," she said. "Deployed twice. His last handler didn't come home." Jack's throat tightened. He understood that kind of pain all too well. Kneeling down, he let Ranger sniff his outstretched hand. The dog's gaze held a familiar wariness, one Jack saw every morning in the mirror. "You and me both, huh?" Jack whispered. For the first time in a long time, something stirred inside him. Hope. Bringing Ranger home was harder than Jack expected. The dog paced the house at night, ears pricked at every sound, eyes scanning the windows as if expecting an enemy that would never come. Jack understood that feeling too well. The first few days, they kept their distance. Jack avoided looking at Ranger for too long, afraid he might see Echo staring back at him. But Ranger, in his quiet way, never left his side. One night, after a particularly bad flashback, Jack found himself sitting on the cold kitchen floor, his head in his hands, heart racing. Without a sound, Ranger padded over and rested his head on Jack's lap. The simple weight of him grounded Jack in the present, pulling him back from the memories. "You're not Echo," Jack murmured, his hand trembling as it ran through Ranger's fur. "But maybe that's okay." Ranger licked his hand in response, as if understanding. Over time, their bond grew. Jack started to train Ranger the way he used to work with Echo, running through drills, giving commands. The routine gave him a sense of purpose again. One afternoon, while they walked the trails near his home, Ranger suddenly stopped and tensed. Jack followed his gaze and saw a woman struggling to walk down a steep incline. Without hesitation, Ranger took off toward her, moving with precise, controlled steps. By the time Jack reached them, Ranger was sitting by the woman's side, his body a steady support as she caught her breath. Jack knelt down. "You okay, ma'am?" She smiled shakily. "I think so. Your dog, he just knew I needed help." Jack ruffled Ranger's fur, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. "Yeah," he said quietly. "He's good at that. But grief is a stubborn thing." One evening, Jack sat on the porch, Echo's dog tags in his hand, turning them over and over. Ranger lay at his feet, ears flicking at every small sound. The quiet stretched between them until Jack spoke, his voice raw. "I made him a promise," he said, staring at the horizon. "Told him I'd take care of him. Always." Ranger lifted his head, his eyes locked on Jack's. Jack exhaled sharply, blinking back tears. "Guess I didn't do such a good job." Ranger nudged his knee gently, as if disagreeing. Jack chuckled softly, wiping at his eyes. "Maybe I can do better this time." And for the first time in years, he meant it. Months passed, and Jack found himself volunteering at the shelter, helping other veterans learn to connect with retired military dogs. Ranger sat by his side every time, a steady presence that reminded him healing wasn't linear, but it was possible. One afternoon, Emily joined him at Echo's grave. She placed a single white flower next to the headstone and smiled at Jack. "You're doing good, you know," she said. "I think Echo would be proud." Jack knelt, brushing his fingers over the cool stone. "I hope so," he whispered. "I'm trying." Ranger lay beside him, tail wagging softly, and Jack reached over to attach Echo's old tags to his collar. The metal jingled softly, the sound both painful and comforting. "You ready, boy?" Jack asked. Ranger barked, standing tall. As they walked back toward the house, Jack realized something. He would always carry Echo with him, but Ranger was his future, a new chance, a new promise. He wasn't just keeping his word to Echo anymore. He was keeping it to himself, because some promises don't end in death. They continue on in every step forward, in every second chance. And for Jack, Ranger wasn't just a dog. He was the reminder that redemption was always possible.